Okay, simple video. I want to share the key kind of learnings or takeaways, are the things I wish I knew up front before I started my podcast. I'm 27, 28 episodes into the University of Life. It's a hell of a journey. I think a lot of people jump into podcasting before they know all that's involved. So hopefully if you're watching this, this will save you. So the very first thing up front is to know your why. I know I'm pulling from Simon Sinek here, but really and truly know why it is that you're setting up a podcast. Because it is one of these things that you have to persevere through. You have to learn a lot along the way, and you have to do a lot of work. So why are you doing it? If you're doing it because you think you're going to get famous, you won't persevere because it'll take a hell of a long time for you to make any real progress. If you're doing it for lead gen, chances are you'll probably get more leads off the back of a bit of Google ads or social media ads. For me, in terms of approaching it, I love having conversations with people, and I learn best through conversations. So regardless of hoping to get any kind of audience or any kind of leads or anything like that, I actually just love the exercise of having those conversations, and I really benefit from it. I get a huge value in terms of the learnings that I take from the interviews I do. And so I hope there's something that you can take from that in terms of, if you're going to set up a podcast, make sure that in the exercise of doing it, it complements you first before anything else, so that, as I said, when things run dry, when you hit challenges, you'll want to do it because you're getting a lot from it. And that's the first key kind of learning. The second is, in your approach, make sure that it's cheap to do. It's very easy when you're starting a podcast to perhaps think, okay, right, I'll rent a studio and I'll get a copywriter to help me with the copy, and I'll get a graphic designer to help me put together some really nice graphics for each podcast. And anyway, before you know it, every episode is going to cost you 5 or 6 or 700 euros. And you know yourself that might be fine for the first 2, 3, 4 episodes, but when suddenly the results aren't coming in as quickly as you'd like, obviously that financial burden is going to become quite an obstacle to your progress. So the key thing I'd be suggesting to you is try to make sure you can set your podcast up as cheaply and efficiently as possible. So for me, I got a really good Rode mic. And the key thing about it is it's mobile, so I don't have to do interviews within a podcast studio. I can do them out on the road, which is huge. The second thing is I do the copy myself, and I actually really enjoy writing the copy myself, so I don't need to use a copywriter. I simply use a photo that whoever I interview, that person gives me, and that saves on graphic design skills. So actually for me to do a podcast, it pretty much costs me nothing. Whereas actually in the start, when I started off, it did cost me 500-600 euros per episode, and I really think that was money unnecessarily spent. And unfortunately, those are the kind of things you learn along the way. So hopefully you'll learn that up front before you start and won't make any of those mistakes in terms of making a spend. The third point, and I kind of touched on my last, is ensure that it's actually easy to do interviews, and it's easy for whoever it is that you're interviewing to do an interview with you. So for example's sake, if you used a studio, it would cost, firstly, money to do it, but also as well, it costs someone in terms of time and energy getting to wherever the studio is to do the interview. Whereas if you have a mobile setup, essentially the way I suggested in the first one, you can come to whoever it is that you're interviewing. You can make it really convenient and easy for them to work with you, to do an interview with you. And that's been really, really, really key for me in terms of when I ask somebody, would they be open to doing an interview, there's no hassle. I can say, I'll meet you wherever is most convenient, rather than please meet me in said studio. So that's a really key thing. The fourth point is, whenever you're interviewing somebody, make sure they're interesting. Make sure that if you're going to have a conversation, that conversation is going to be actually valuable and worth listening to. I know that is so obvious, but it is actually something, I suppose, maybe in some of my earlier interviews, I got really excited of the idea of, I've got a podcast and I'm going to interview this person. But because I didn't do a bit of pre-work beforehand, because I didn't know how to navigate through the interview, the end result was miserable, and it wasn't worth publishing. Nobody got any value from listening to it. So key thing is, make sure, obviously, whoever it is that you're interviewing is interesting. And two, make sure that you do the research up front and you go into the conversation knowing that it isn't just a chat. You're actually there making sure you're going to get the most interesting content out of that person and the most value for whoever it is that's listening. So that's absolutely key. And I really, really encourage you to think on that very, very heavily. The fifth point is very much a follow-up from that is think of your audience. Keep thinking of your audience because it'll really help guide you. It'll help guide you in terms of who you pick to interview, the questions you're having, and then obviously where things go and where things grow. I think a lot of the time we can find ourselves thinking very self-centeredly. And it's important, when you're doing things, obviously up front I said it needs to bring value to you. But in order for it to grow, it needs to bring value to an audience because you'll get energy from that audience, but also in time, fingers crossed, you'll get sponsorship because of the growth of the audience. So make sure you're keeping them in mind. Anyway, those are 5 quick, really, really simple kind of digests that I wanted to share off the back of my work on the podcast. There are countless others, and if you've got this far and you're really thinking about a podcast, do your research up front. It will stand to you so much, and it will really, really improve the growth curve of the project that you're going into. So do the work. It'll really, really stand to you, and I hope I've sent you value too.